Hello everybody and welcome back to the FPL Phillips YouTube channel and to another FPL video ahead of Game Week 5, where in this one I'm going to be discussing all things surrounding FPL, current trends at the moment with transfers, teams, players, all that stuff, who you should be jumping on, my advice to you, whatever your team is at the moment. And we're going to be covering some of your most in-demand questions. And one of those to start off, and one that I've got myself for my team this week, is whether or not it's worth still bringing in Mbeumo. Now, we've seen Wissa's injury, which looks like a pretty severe one, cause some concern amongst FPL managers as to whether or not Brentford are now still a worthwhile investment. And there's a good reason for why they should be. They've got a great run of fixtures starting Game Week 6, really. And so for this, I thought I'd provide you with some data that you probably won't see elsewhere, and that is to do with stats for Mbeumo whilst Wissa is on the pitch and whilst Wissa has been out at various points during last season's campaign. And now there isn't a huge sample size for this, and Wissa didn't have a big long-term injury last season. I'm still yet to know the exact severity of this injury. Maybe he'll be back in 3 or 4 weeks anyway, in which case you'd maybe take less of an impact on this data. But there's 354 minutes he played without Wissa last season compared to the 1600 odd minutes with Wissa on the pitch. And during that time, you can see the difference in expected goals, shots, expected assists, and then attempted assists here. And the big impact really that you can see here is the XG was actually higher even with Wissa out. So Mbeumo being relied upon maybe a little bit more in that Brentford system, 4 goals in Vissa's absence. And that's reflected with the number of shots he was taking as well. Interesting, the shots on target number was actually less, so he was taking more shots, getting fewer on target, but still that volume of shots was equating to some good XG numbers for him, and so I wouldn't be worried about Mbeumo drying up in terms of goals with Wissa out, even if it is for a while. Where it does change a little bit is in the expected assist data, with Mbeumo becoming a bit less of a provider. He's not got that Wissa up front to kind of aim for and get assists from. The expected assist 0.24 with Wissa compared to 0.16 without Wissa, and these stats are of course all per 90 minutes. But the attempted assists are still there for him, so 2.29 attempted assists per 90 without Wissa compared to when Vissa's on the pitch, fewer attempted assists with 1.29 per 90. So he's not creating as many big chances, but he is still trying to create things. It does just kind of suggest this data that there isn't really that player up there to try and get the ball to. Now, who comes in Vissa's absence? You've got some good players there at Brentford. I'm sure they'll probably manage to adapt and perform quite well with these nice fixtures that they've got coming up. It's whether or not your interpretation of the data and what you've seen when Vissa's not been on the pitch last season, if you watch much of Brentford, it kind of is still enough for you to jump on Mbeumo as an option. Now, in terms of the other picks around that price point, I don't think there are too many better than him. You've got Eze, who's now not on penalties, and his data has not looked impressive at all over the opening games. You've got some of the Bournemouth midfielders you could go for. You've got Smith Rowe around that 5.5 million price tag who you could go for and save a bit of money to maybe add in that extra premium defender. But personally, I still think you've got a 90-minute man here on penalties with some good fixtures coming up. There is a lot going in Bryan Mbeumo's favour. He is still a top player on my watch list and one that I'm even considering jumping on this week, even with the Tottenham fixture. And I think, yeah, he's a great pick for anyone on a wildcard right now. And of course, wildcard next week will be very much a template with Mbeumo in. And there's good reason for that. I wouldn't be worried about Vissa's absence. We'll see exactly how long he will be out for shortly. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on Mbeumo, and I think that you should go for him. I still think he's a great pick. And here are some of those other options at that cheaper price point. I covered these with my wildcard video that I uploaded on Sunday evening. If you want to go and check out the full squad, the video will be on my page or whatever. If I remember to add a card, then it will be up there. But here's a comparison of some of those players around that price point, 5.5 million. And I think the standouts are really Semenyo, Smith Rowe, Minte, and McNeil. So I've only picked one from a few teams, whereas at Bournemouth, you could go for Tavernier, who looks like he may be on penalties if Evan Nilsson is taken off them immediately after missing that first one that he's taken. But I still think Semenyo is the standout option from Bournemouth, really. But the data is quite tight between those two at the moment. So if you want a really extreme differential, then Tavernier could be a pick for you. But Semenyo is a 90-minute man, as is Dwight McNeil, and Semenyo is the pick of those two who's had the superior expected FPL points per 90 so far. He's up there with Smith Rowe, who has struggled a little bit more for the minutes. We know that Smith Rowe and Minte both came off early in game week 1, which will be affecting their average minutes over the first 4. Semenyo is a really big goal threat, whereas McNeil, that you can see in the expected assists, is much more of an assist threat in general. And the fixtures also very much go in favour of Dwight McNeil. Over the next 6, Everton rank 4th, whilst teams like Bournemouth and Fulham are down in 18th and 17th respectively. So maybe the fixtures aren't going to breed as much form for Semenyo and Smith Rowe, but I do still think that players like Smith Rowe are a good option. Fulham have been performing well. Their expected goals data for Bournemouth and Fulham is much, much higher. They're kind of inside the top 5 or top 8 teams, whereas Everton are down in the bottom 4 for expected goals per 90 over the first 4. So although the fixtures go in favour of Everton, the expected goals data has not been great for them, despite the fact they have been putting the ball in the net a decent amount of times this season from what we've seen so far. FPL Review have the expected points over the next 3 going in favour of Dwight McNeil on 10.9, with Smith Rowe falling behind the pack really. It's quite tight between the other 3, but Smith Rowe down on 8.6, which I thought was interesting. Which one of these 4 is your favourite? That's the comment I want you to leave below in today's video. I'll only ask you to leave one. Help me out with the algorithm. Cheers. And on that kind of note, I thought we'd have a look at the expected goals of certain teams and teams that you can target over the next 5. And what I'm using here are the Draft Hound odds of 2+ goals for a team in a specific fixture, and then I've averaged that out, and this list is sorted by the average over the next 5. So if you're on a wild card, this is the kind of range you want to look at, 5 to 6 game weeks, and you can see some pretty expected teams at the top: Manchester City, Arsenal, Liverpool. Then you've got Aston Villa, so I think Rodgers is still a very good pick at that 5 million mark, and I think he probably even is better than maybe even the other 4 options that we just looked at. Despite not impressing so far in terms of points, he has actually created a lot of chances that Watkins should have put away, and he should have taken some chances himself. So you've just got to hope he'll come good and play the patient game if you own Rodgers right now, in my view. Chelsea and Tottenham then come in next with Newcastle and then Manchester United. And then we've got Brentford, Brighton, and then it falls down a bit. But Everton aren't too low down on here, where their expected goals data isn't actually very good. They're somewhat more towards the mid-table element when you look at those chances of 2+ goals in a game over the next 5. Wolves right down at the bottom. Don't go anywhere near the Wolves or Southampton attacks is my advice. But yeah, well, now we'll take a look at the clean sheet odds to flip it round and look at the defenders. And it's a very similar story when you look towards the top of the table. It looks, almost identical really, with Man City, Arsenal, and Liverpool leading the way. We've then got Aston Villa coming in, so Luca Dean is going to become what it looks like a bit of an option, as much as I hate the troll and will never own him again in FPL due to what he's done in the past. He's picked up a few assists already, he's got some decent clean sheet potential according to statistics, so he is a player where you probably could go there. A very slim chance maybe that he gets dropped now for Maatsen coming in, who I expected to start the season really. Been surprised Luca Dean's kept his place for so long, but he's been playing okay. Maatsen is just one who will come off the bench, is one who's going to be utilised at 40 million. Maybe with competition starting up, Luca Dean might be used, in Europe, so then Maatsen could see some minutes in the Premier League. So definitely not as nailed as some other kind of 4.5 million defenders, Luca Dean, but he does offer that upside of playing for a big team and having maybe more clean sheet potential than some other 4.5 million defenders from teams towards the bottom. You have got options like Mickey van der Ven, who falls inside the next 3 teams, which are Chelsea, Manchester United and Tottenham. And then it's a very similar story in terms of order, really, with the very similar teams at the bottom as well. So yeah, on that note of defenders, we're now going to take a look at some of the key decisions I think that are to be taken around defenders. And one predicament I'm in particular is who to pair up with a certain asset I own right now. And if you didn't know what I meant by that, then I meant in the form of rotation. I think a lot of managers at the moment have invested in Anthony Robinson over the last few game weeks. And this becomes a little bit irrelevant if you're looking at a wildcard 6. But if you're looking like your team's in a decent spot, and maybe you could hold that wildcard for a bit longer, you want to hold on to Robinson, who does look like a good pick in his own right, then you want to pick a defender to maybe bring in for someone who's not performing, who lines up well in terms of fixtures. So maybe you can bench Robinson for some games coming up where Fulham do enter a little bit of a tricky patch, namely game week 5 against Newcastle. Doesn't look a brilliant game on paper, That being said, Newcastle have been pretty poor so far this season, and Fulham have looked okay defensively. But you've got Game Week 7 and Game Week 8, where you're going to think it's very unlikely to pick up a clean sheet in those two against Manchester City and Aston Villa. And then a few other games within the next 10 or so, where you wouldn't really favour a clean sheet away fixtures against Palace and Tottenham in Game Week 11 and Game Week 13. So I've looked over on Fantasy Football Fix. Actually, I've used that rotation planner, picked out some teams that have some nice fixtures that line up well, and this is what I've come up with. Mickey van der Ven at 4.5 million looks like a standout option. Spurs actually have some good expected goals conceded numbers and good expected clean sheet numbers over the opening 4 game weeks, despite a fixture against Arsenal, etc. So Van der Ven could equally be a good pick you go for. I would be worried with Spurs. They have looked very shaky from set pieces, etc. You're probably going to get a few annoying clean sheet wipeouts. And of course, with Van der Ven being a centre-back, you maybe don't have as much attacking threat as you do have from some of the more exciting fullback options. But he's still a pick you could go for. And maybe even if you just own Pedro Porro right now, just hold on to him, try and keep him in your team. And 5.5 million, you're going to get less value out of him. But this could still be a somewhat decent strategy if you own Porro up at 5.5. Because you get a nice fixture set of Brentford, Forest, Brighton, West Ham, Everton, Brentford, Ipswich, Wolves, and then Fulham. So that looks pretty nice over the next, 8 game weeks. But I've got another option for you if this one doesn't float your boat. And that pick is Davis at Ipswich, who is a much more attacking player. The data hasn't been brilliant for him so far, but just from what I've seen from him in the Championship and kind of, taking into account he's had some difficult fixtures over the opening 2 in particular. Ipswich are a team you could go for and have a very favourable fixture run coming up, especially if you want to bench Robertson this week against Newcastle. You can bring Davis in, who's got Southampton away. You then cover those 2 game weeks in 7 and 8 with West Ham United and Everton. You also get Leicester at home in Game Week 10. Game Week 11 is a little bit more of a tricky one. You're probably going to have to play Robinson against Crystal Palace away there, but they've been a pretty poor side so far at the start of this season. Then you've got Wolves at home in Game Week 12 and Forest away, which isn't an easy fixture, but you'd probably start Davis there in Game Week 13. So a good option here, if you maybe own Greaves as your 4.0 million, you could maybe go full cheapskate and just full on start a centre-back of Ipswich and hope maybe for a clean sheet. But I like Davis. Just spending that 0.5 million extra gets you a whole lot more really in terms of attacking threat. So he's another exciting pick you could go for if you want to hold on to Robinson. I think you get less value here just because you're holding on to Robinson. You're not using a transfer on him, but you're only starting him 3 times over the next 8 game weeks. And at that point, you just kind of consider, is it worth holding off on a wild card, maybe to try and keep players like Robinson in your side? Or could you just maybe use that chip and load up on some more assets? So if you're on the fence for the Game Week 6 wild card, I probably wouldn't bring in Davis and rotate alongside Robinson and hope all's going to go well. But this is definitely a good strategy if the rest of your team is looking pretty good on paper. You've already got Salah, Haaland, you've got the players you want, you're able to get Arsenal assets in, then this could easily be the pairing for you if you want someone who's a bit more spicy and exciting. And then last but not least, if you're just willing to hold on to Robinson for 2 more game weeks and start him against Newcastle and Nottingham Forest, maybe you've got other places in your team that you need to sort out, different positions with problems in, you want to bring in these Arsenal assets in time for Game Week 6, then you could easily go for 8 Nuri in Game Week 7. So just ignore those 2 crap fixtures against Aston Villa and Liverpool over the next 2. Bring in 8 Nuri for Brentford away, then start Robinson in Game Week 8 and Game Week 9. I'd say one of the downsides of this strategy is you've got to start Robinson in Game Week 8 against Aston Villa. But then from Game Week 10 onwards, you get to get the use out of 8 Nuri, who's looked very good so far this season. I'm assuming he'll be back fit and available. He's got 2 weeks out with what looks like a very, very minor injury. And he has looked very attacking, as we know. Hopefully he could do well in those fixtures against Palace, Southampton and Bournemouth across game weeks 10 to 13, starting Robinson in that game between the 2 sides in game week 12. So I like this one maybe the most of the bunch because it gives you that bit of extra time to get players in that other managers will be wildcarding in Game Week 6 if you've got free transfers saved up in particular. This could be the strat for you. Make sure you've got your Raya and your Gabriel, other Arsenal players your Mbeumo, who we talked about earlier, in time for Game Week 6. And then you can use the transfer in game week 7 to bring in Aït-Nouri. And then you've got a pretty nice defensive setup to rotate. Maybe you rotate these two as your third defender alongside Gabriel and then a Liverpool asset, for example, in your back four, or back three, I should say, starting every week. That would look very nice indeed. So I like the look of this one. I personally think it's hard to split all three strategies, but this one offers you a nice alternative for, like I mentioned, if you want to hold on to Robinson for 2 more weeks, or more so if you just can't afford to spend the transfer right now and you want to hold off 2 more game weeks, by which time you'll maybe have a few less problems to sort out because all the fixture swings have already occurred that are happening in game week 6. And so when I was looking at assets to rotate with Robinson, this is the kind of table that I came up with and how I will analyse certain assets before just looking at fixtures. Once I found one to rotate well or look nice, then this is kind of the shortlist that I've picked from and the players that I think you could go for over the next few game weeks if you're looking to bring in a cheap defensive asset to go alongside your Gabriel or whoever you've got as your premiums. Or maybe you can even go for a few of them if you like the look of more of them. Play however you want to, FPL. So yeah, Luca Dean, unfortunately, in at the top there, the troll that he is. Expected points across the next 3, he's on 8.4, only beaten by Lewis Dunk by FPL Review, who's on 8.8. Despite Brighton's fixtures, a 16th best over the next 6 defensive-wise. In this table, you kind of just want to look for a green row. I've ranked them from 1 to 10 in everything, every category. So you've got the expected goals involvements there. You've got expected FPL points per 90, and then their true FPL points per 90, which is most used to kind of see if a player is living up to their potential, involving XG, XA, expected clean sheets. Are they getting those goals, assists, and clean sheets? Basically, is what that stat is going to tell you by looking at those two as a sort of pairing there. And if you want to see these graphics kind of without all the nattering of myself and just see them on your Instagram feed throughout your days during the week, then I have them all going out as Instagram posts, so make sure to follow me over on there. FPL Phillips is my @. So yeah, Rico Lewis I still think is a good option, but he's kind of got the same problem as Luca Dean where there's uncertainty in minutes when European competitions are starting up, but one team who won't have that issue are Nottingham Forest, and I've gone with 3 Forest defensive options here. Now, Milenkovic, or Murillo if you want to go there, are the most nailed picks, with Milenkovic actually rocking up some pretty decent expected goal involvement numbers for his position at centre-back, actually outscoring Aina. And then Moreno, whose average I've taken from last season when he was at Villa, just because he's only had 1 game so far at Forest, but I'd expect him to have kind of a similar positioning and role there. So Milenkovic is still looking pretty good, and it is nailed on for minutes, as said, which isn't really the case with Aina and Moreno when you've got Nico Williams, who is still in competition with them at the fullback spots. But from what I'm reading, I think Aina and Moreno will remain first choice. But it just doesn't really make too much sense to take the added risk and go for someone who's less certain on minutes when Milenkovic still has as good numbers going forward and underlying data. You then got Aït-Nouri in here, whose fixtures are pretty woeful, but has good expected goal involvement numbers, 0.40. We've seen him play even out of position at times last season, being employed, in the forward line, which I think a lot of Wolves fans are keen to see from him. I think some of them think he's a little bit wasted in that left-back role, so maybe we'll see that later on in the season, but with the fixtures so poor, his expected points don't get above 5.5, which is the weakest in this list. We've then got Robinson in there, who's sitting kind of very, very average. Not great in terms of expected goal involvements so far this season. The Fulham fixtures do tail off a little bit, which is why we're going to talk about rotation for him. And then we've got Mickey van der Ven in here. So he's pretty much bog standard average as well that you could go for. I will talk about why he could be a good option in a moment. Then we've got Lewis Dunk, who mentioned is the top for expected points, and then Davis as a pick as well. So yeah, there's one player who I think a lot of people own at the moment. That's Robinson. Let's get into why I think rotation on him could be a good thing. And in just a moment, I'm going to take you through my work through as to how I kind of find players like this and what websites I use to do it. But this is the graphic I've put together for the forwards this week and the ones that I'm considering bringing in for Isak, who I'm most likely going to take out of my team either with a wild card or a free transfer this week. Now, some of you might be planning a wild card 6 and you're looking at just a 1-week punt, in which case this table's maybe of less value to you. But if you're looking like you might be able to swerve the wildcard and avoid it, if you've got some free transfers made up maybe, then who is the best forward option to go for? Well, this is the table I'll be using to decide. You've got your players ranging all the way up from Watkins at 8.9 million, down to the likes of Vardy at 5.6, who provide a more cheap alternative and allow you to use those funds to upgrade elsewhere in your side. So you've got Havertz at the top, who's averaging 90 minutes a game. Isak also was averaging 90 minutes per game until yesterday, in which case I've not been able to squeeze these stats in for the Newcastle game that occurred, at that 4 p.m. slot on the Sunday. But everyone else's data is updated for game week 4. What you want to look for is just a green row in here. So you've got players who are on penalties coming in. And my standout pick really from here as a take-home message is Calvert-Lewin at 5.9 million, who's looked pretty good so far. Now, his expected FPL points per 90 isn't the best of the bunch, but his outcome, 6.07 FPL points per 90 minutes. So he's doing very well. He had some great chances in Everton's last fixture. I think that he's in that kind of form where until he gets injured, he'll look like a brilliant player. And I'm hoping that he'll be able to stay fit, because I'm very strongly considering having a wildcard draft with just Haaland and Calvert-Lewin up front. I still like the look of some of the Brighton forwards. We need to assess, how long João Pedro is going to be out for. If it's going to be any longer than 1 or 2 games with that nick, then that maybe even makes Danny Welbeck a better option, who's more assured for some minutes. But I think many managers will be looking, if they've got the funds, to upgrade Isak to Ollie Watkins, whose fixtures become very nice over the next couple of game weeks. As you can see, Aston Villa ranked 3rd in fixture difficulty over the next 6 weeks. His expected data has been brilliant. We've seen him miss numerous chances already, but his outcome's still been okay. Obviously a brace last time out. He played all the game as well, which was something we haven't seen from him loads. Maybe when Villa are in front, it's more likely going to be a straight swap for Watkins for Duran, who's going to come on the pitch pretty much every game, you imagine. Whereas if Villa are behind or in a more tight game, then we could see Watkins just a straight swap for Duran, which will be the more likely prospect. So in some ways, being bad fixtures isn't a great advantage, because Villa are more likely to be ahead if they're 1 or 2 goals up. Then you're going to see Watkins maybe subbed off around the 60-70 minute mark rather than getting the full 90 like you'd want him to. But he should still be on penalties, as do a lot of the other forwards further down this list are taking those responsibilities, including Jean-Philippe Mateta, now who you could kind of have half a tick for this one, because the manager's come out and said that it's kind of up to Mateta and Eze, depending on the players who takes the penalty at certain points in certain games. So Mateta kind of has half a tick there, but he still looks like he could be a good option now, down at 7.4 million. Vardy could be an option as well if you want to go for a cheap punt. He could be even a 1 week option that you go for Leicester. But over the course of the season, you're probably not going to want to own Jamie Vardy all that long term, as expected FPL points per 90 have not been impressive, and Leicester's XG just does stink up the gaff. And then Evan Nilsson, who's kind of yet to find his feet, could still offer a decent pick at 6.0 million if you think he's going to come good. It's just those Bournemouth fixtures, 18th ranked over the next 6, that would be putting me off. And his FPL points so far per 90 has been pretty rubbish, due to the fact that he missed a penalty. So yeah, that's my analysis on the forwards. Let's get into the next thing. And so one final thing I wanted to do was take a quick look at the Fantasy Football Fix website, take a little bit of a work through for an example as to how I've looked into a player in this video, so in Mbeumo for example, and how I'm weighing up whether or not I think he's the good asset to invest in still over this game week. Of course, taking into account the stuff that we discussed with a more in-depth analysis on Vissa's minutes and when he's on the pitch, etc. But in general, this is the tool I will use, the Fantasy Football Fix Opta-Stats tool. I'm over here on the website. I've selected a number of players that I would like to compare with Mbeumo, who's in the 3rd row down. You can see priced at 7.1. And then I'll always kind of order these players in terms of expected FPL points per 90 minutes. I've got the per 90 box ticked up here, as you can see. And then I will sort them in terms of this, have a minimum minutes in generally, pick out some players who I think are good assets. So I've got the likes of, Luis Diaz at a similar price point. We've got Eze in here as well, who, as you can see, falls very far towards the bottom. And I thought this was something that's interesting, is that over those first, 360 minutes that Eze has played, he's performed pretty poorly in terms of expected FPL points as well as his general outcome. So 5.56 for him per 90. Compare that up to Mbeumo at 5.69. So there is a pretty big gap there when you consider the XG that Mbeumo could get from penalties on top of that, and then the actual outcome, in which if we sort by that and true FPL points, up at the top it's Luis Diaz, and Mbeumo in 3rd with 6.52, and then Eze all the way down on 4.00. So Eze does jump up a fair bit. If you look at expected FPL points, Mbeumo is just above Eze there, but players like Jota, Diaz, Smith Rowe lead the way, just might be a bit more less sure for minutes, of course, when you're talking about Liverpool assets in particular. And then the other thing I will use when I'm looking at players like this and I spot like, ooh, McNeil has actually performed pretty well so far. Like if he's 5th here for FPL points per 90 over the first 5. I head over to the fixture analyzer. I'll sort from attacking difficulty. Over the next 6 game weeks tends to be a nice range that I'll look at, and I can see there Everton 2nd for attacking fixture difficulty over the next 6 game weeks. Whereas someone like a Semenyo, if I'm looking at him, maybe looking at Tavernier as well as an option, Bournemouth all the way down, 3rd up from the bottom there on your screen for attacking fixture difficulty. So it's not looking good. I'll be looking at transferring someone like an Isak out as well, with their fixture run being flat bottom of the league over the next 6 games. Eze's fixtures as well not looking good, with Palace down there 4th up from the bottom. And so yeah, this is kind of the general workflow I will go through. I recommend Fantasy Football Fix a lot. I don't think I've even got like an affiliate link or anything, but it's just the website I use and the website that I have the most fun with playing around. I use the player heat maps tool to look at when Wissa was on the pitch. Wissa was not. So yeah, I won't make any money off it, but if you want a tool for yourself and you're interested in this stuff like the nerd I am, then you can go and check it out for sure. But yeah, other than that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've taken something away from today's video. Maybe you've seen something that you don't see in other FPL videos on YouTube. If you did enjoy it, then please do leave a thumbs up. The likes weren't great on the last one because I don't really tend to beg for them at the start of the video. So make sure you leave a thumbs up if asking does make a difference to you. And if you're new around here, then make sure to subscribe as well if you'd like to see more of my content down the line. So yeah, nothing more to be said than that. Then hopefully you have a good game week 5. I hope that your arrow is green, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Goodbye.